I can still hear the engines. Even now, in whatever passes for silence in this place, I hear them, the grinding, relentless thunder of the Leman Russ battle tanks that were my world for 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days. The Departamento Munitorum recorded my service as exemplary. My commanding officer noted my dedication in reports filed in triplicate and sent up the chain of command to officials who would never read them. The ecclesiarchy blessed our machine and called us the Emperor's Hammer. But none of them sat in that steel box. None of them breathed the air inside, thick with promethium fumes and the sweat of 4 men packed into a space barely large enough for 3. None of them felt what it meant to become part of the machine, to have your humanity ground away by duty and diesel and the endless, deafening roar of war. My name is Corporal Mikhail Toran, gunner of the battle tank designated Crown of Thorns, 3rd vehicle in the 2nd platoon of the 907th Armored Regiment, seconded to the 15th Army Group during the pacification of Kalista II. I write was because I am not certain what I am now, whether the person who bore that name still exists in any meaningful sense, or whether he died somewhere in the mud and ash of that blighted world, leaving only this hollow thing that remembers being him. The records will show I survived. They will note that I received the Medallion of Service, 2nd class, and a commendation for valor in the face of the enemy. They will not record what I lost, because the administratum has no forms for such things, no way to quantify the slow erosion of the soul. I came to the Armored Corps from a manufactorum world, one of countless thousands scattered across the Imperium, its name as forgotten to history as the names of the men who worked there. My childhood was the smell of machine oil and recycled air, the taste of corpse starch rations, and the sound of the shift bells that marked our lives in 12-hour increments. When the tithe collectors came, I was 19 standard years old, strong enough to be useful, young enough to be molded. They lined us up in the plaza before the administratum building, a structure of grey rockcrete that loomed over us like a tombstone, and the officials in their brown robes moved among us with data slates and scanning wands, marking some for infantry, others for naval service, still others for the auxiliary support corps. I was marked for armor. The tech adept who examined me noted my mechanical aptitude. I had worked the tool lines since I was 12 and pronounced me suitable for gunnery training. I felt pride. Then, the Emperor, forgive me, I felt pride. Training took place on a fortress world whose name I was never told, a place of endless grey stone and grey sky, where we learned to strip and maintain the weapons systems, to calculate firing solutions under pressure, to coordinate with our crew in the cramped confines of the tank. They taught us the rituals, the prayers to the machine god that must accompany every action, the proper way to anoint the breech mechanism with sacred oils, the litanies of activation, and the canticles of maintenance. Our instructors were veterans, men whose eyes had the 1,000-yard stare of those who had seen too much, and they spoke of the tank as a living thing, a holy vehicle that demanded respect and sacrifice. You do not drive the tank, our drill master told us, his voice rough as grinding gears. You become part of it. Your blood is its oil, your breath is its coolant, your will is its ammunition. Alone, you are nothing. Together with the machine, you are the Emperor's wrath made manifest. We shouted the responses they taught us, our voices echoing off the stone walls of the training hall, and we believed every word. The Crown of Thorns was a Leman Russ battle tank, Mark IV variant, manufactured in the forge complexes of a world I would never see by workers whose faces I would never know. She was 70 tons of armored steel, armed with a battle cannon capable of reducing buildings to rubble and a hull-mounted heavy bolter for infantry suppression. Her engine was a monster, a diesel behemoth that burned refined promethium and belched black smoke, and when she moved, the ground trembled. Inside, she was a maze of pipes and conduits, ammunition racks and crew stations, everything designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The driver sat at the front, encased in his own private hell of limited vision and claustrophobic terror. The commander stood in the cupola, exposed to enemy fire, whenever he needed to direct the tank in battle. The loader worked in the turret basket, manhandling shells that weighed as much as a man's torso in a space barely wide enough to turn around. And I, the gunner, sat before the targeting mechanisms, my eye pressed to the optic, my hands on the elevation and traverse controls, my world reduced to the narrow field of view through the gun sight. Our crew was typical of the armored corps, 4 men bound together by duty and necessity, thrust into intimacy by the confines of the tank. Commander Harrick was a career soldier, 15 years in the service, his face weathered and scarred, his voice a perpetual rasp from breathing too much smoke. He had lost his left hand in a previous campaign. The augmetic replacement was crude, all exposed mechanisms and rough metal, but he refused reassignment, claiming the crown of thorns was his until the Emperor or the enemy took him from her. The driver, Jens, was younger than me by a year, a thin man from an agri world who spoke with an accent I could barely understand, and who suffered from nightmares that left him gasping in the dark. The loader was Piotr, a giant of a man with arms like pistons, and a simple, cheerful nature that seemed impossible given where we were and what we did. He sang hymns while he worked, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through even the engine noise, and he treated the tank's ammunition like sacred relics, handling each shell with reverence. We deployed to Kalista II in the hold of a transport ship, packed in with hundreds of other vehicles and tens of thousands of infantry, our tanks secured to the deck with massive chains while we lived in the spaces between them. The journey took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of stale air and staler food, of constant prayers over the Vox system and the ever-present vibration of the ship's engines. We were not told why we were going to Kalista VII, only that heretics had seized control of several hive cities and that the governor had requested military intervention. This was normal. The common soldier is not trusted with strategy or context. We are given objectives and expected to achieve them, the reasons mattering far less than the results. When we finally made planetfall, descending in dropships that shook and rattled like they were coming apart, I got my first look at the world we would be fighting on. It was a nightmare of industrial decay, a planet of rusted manufactorums and poisoned wastes, its sky the color of old bruises and its air thick with particulates that made breathing an exercise in controlled coughing. The hive cities rose in the distance like tombstones, their spires disappearing into the chemical haze, and between them stretched wastes of grey ash and twisted metal. The first month was almost routine, if war can ever be called routine. We moved in column formation, dozens of tanks grinding across the wasteland, infantry units marching alongside or riding on our hulls, the air filled with the smell of promethium and unwashed bodies. The enemy harassed us with long-range fire, rockets and lass weapons that forced us to button up and advance blind, trusting Jens to keep us on course while Harrick directed our responses over the Vox. I fired the battle cannon 37 times in those first weeks, each shot a ritual of calculation and prayer, the recoil slamming through the tank like the kick of an angry god. The loader would slam the breech open, the acrid smoke pouring out, and Piotr would manhandle the next shell into place while I traversed to the next target. My world narrowed to the crosshairs and the targets beyond. Infantry looked like ants through the gun sight, scurrying things that fell apart when the high-explosive rounds detonated among them. Structures crumbled, their walls no match for armor-piercing shells. And always, there was the noise, the roar of the engine, the crack of the cannon, the rattle of the bolter, the screaming of wounded men over the Vox. Inside the tank, we existed in our own private hell. The temperature was unbearable, the engine heat cooking us in our station, sweat soaking through our uniforms until the fabric clung to our skin like a second layer. The smell was worse for men in close quarters, the reek of their bodies mixing with the chemical stench of propellant and the metallic tang of hot metal. We ate when we could, rations consumed cold because there was no way to heat them, the taste of corpse starch and synthetic protein coating our mouths. We slept in shifts, curled in impossible positions because there was no room to stretch out, the engine noise a constant presence that invaded even our dreams. And we prayed, "Emperor, How we prayed. Before each engagement, Harrick would lead us in the litany of protection, his voice crackling over the internal vox, and we would respond in unison, the words as familiar as our own names. Before firing, I would whisper the gunner's prayer, asking the Emperor's guidance for my aim. After each battle, Pyotr would bless the ammunition we had expended, thanking the machine god for its proper function. Prayer was as much a part of tank warfare as ammunition and fuel, the scaffolding that held our sanity together when everything else threatened to come apart. The character of the campaign changed when we reached the outskirts of the first hive city. The enemy was dug in, their positions reinforced with prefabricated bunkers and minefields. Their artillery zeroed in on the approach routes. Command ordered us forward anyway, because in the Imperium's military doctrine, armor is meant to absorb punishment, to trade our lives for ground gained and objectives secured. We attacked at dawn, 100 tanks advancing in line, and the world exploded around us. Artillery rounds walked across our formation, each detonation a hammer blow that shook the crown of thorns to her rivets. I saw the tank to our left take a direct hit, the turret lifting off in a fountain of flame and spinning through the air like a child's toy. The crew never had a chance. One moment they were there, their vox chatter filling the battalion frequency, and the next there was only static and the burning wreck they had become. We drove past them because there was no choice, because stopping meant dying, and Harrick's voice was steady in my ears, calling targets, directing my fire. I put rounds into bunkers, into weapon emplacements, into anything that looked like it might hurt us, and the battle cannon roared its defiance at the heretics who dared resist the Emperor's will. We breached the outer defenses and pushed into the underhive, the tank's treads grinding over rubble and corpses alike, the hull bolter chattering as Harrick fired at targets I couldn't see from my position. The streets were narrow, barely wide enough for the tank to pass, and the buildings rose on either side like canyon walls, their windows dark and threatening. This was the tanker's nightmare. The close terrain where ambush was easy and maneuver impossible, where a single well-placed mine or rocket could brew up your vehicle and leave you burning. Harrick kept us moving, never stopping, never giving the enemy time to set up their shots, and I traversed the turret in constant motion, searching for threats. The enemy came at us from everywhere, from windows and doorways, from rooftops and rubble piles, and we killed them in ones and twos, the high explosive shells turning their positions into tombs. But for every heretic we killed, it seemed like 2 more appeared, and the ammunition counter clicked steadily downward, each round expended, bringing us closer to the moment when we would be defenseless. The breakthrough came on the 4th day of urban fighting, when our platoon punched through to the central plaza and linked up with the infantry units that had been fighting building to building for weeks. The plaza was a scene from the lowest circles of hell, its stones stained with blood and oil, the bodies of the dead stacked like cordwood where they had been cleared from the streets. The survivors looked like ghosts, their faces hollow and eyes empty, and they stared at our tanks with expressions I couldn't read, not gratitude, not relief, just a kind of numb acceptance that they were still alive and others were not. Command declared the hive city pacified, though the fighting continued in the upper levels for another month, and we were rotated back to a forward support area for resupply and maintenance. It was the first time in 17 days that we had left the Crown of Thorns for more than a few minutes at a time, and when I climbed out of the turret, my legs nearly gave out, the muscles cramped and weak from disuse. The smell of the outside air even poisoned as it was seemed sweet after the fetid atmosphere inside the tank, and I stood on the hull and breathed it in great gasps, feeling the chemical rain on my face and not caring. But we could not stay out long. The tank needed us. The maintenance rituals were elaborate and essential, each component requiring inspection and blessing, and we worked through the night to prepare the Crown of Thorns for the next engagement. Pyotr and I repacked the ammunition racks, stacking the shells in their proper sequence while reciting the litany of loading. Jens crawled beneath the hull to check the treads and running gear, emerging black with grease and grinning despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Harrick coordinated with the tech priests who oversaw the major repairs. arguing with them about priority and necessity while their servo skulls buzzed around his head like metal insects. And when the work was done, when every system had been checked and rechecked, we did not leave the tank. We slept beside her, wrapped in our blankets on the cold ground, because we knew that come morning we would climb back inside and she would be our world again. The second hive city was worse. The enemy had learned from their defeat, had adapted their tactics to counter our armor. They deployed teams with melter weapons, short-range tank killers that could burn through our armor like it was paper, and they hit us in the narrow streets where we couldn't maneuver. I watched 3 tanks die in as many minutes, each one erupting in flames as the superheated beams found fuel tanks or ammunition stores, the crew's screams cutting off as the fire consumed them. We survived through luck and Jens's skill at the controls, the driver somehow finding routes through the rubble that kept us moving, kept us ahead of the ambush teams. But the close calls multiplied. A rocket-propelled grenade struck our right tread, nearly throwing the track, and we limped back to the support area on damaged suspension. A melter beam scarred our front glacis, the armor bubbling and running like wax, and we thanked the Emperor that it had struck a non-critical area. A mine detonated beneath our left side, lifting the tank and slamming it back down, leaving us all bleeding from our noses and ears, our hearing damaged by the overpressure. And still we fought. Still we climbed into the crown of thorns each morning and drove into the hell that was urban tank warfare. Still I pressed my eye to the gun sight and called targets. Still Piotr loaded shells with his hymns on his lips. Still Jens coaxed the damaged machine forward. Still Herrick stood in the cupola and directed our violence with his rasping voice. We did this because it was our duty. We did this because the alternative, abandoning our post, refusing to fight, was not just death but damnation, the eternal punishment of the traitor's soul. We did this because we had become part of the machine, as the drill master had promised, and the machine could not stop while the Emperor's enemies still drew breath. The dreams started around then, though I did not recognize them as dreams at first. I would be sitting at my station, eye to the gun sight, and suddenly I would realize that I could not look away. The optic had grown into my face, the metal and glass merging with my flesh, and I was the gun sight now, unable to turn, unable to close my eyes, forced to watch as the targets crossed my field of view. I would try to scream, but no sound would come, because my mouth was the firing mechanism, my breath the trigger pull, and when I exhaled, the cannon would fire, and I would feel the shell's trajectory through my own body, would feel it impact and detonate in targets that I suddenly recognized as human, as people with faces and names and lives that I was ending. I would wake gasping, my hands clutching at my face to make sure it was still my own, and Piotr would pat my shoulder in the darkness and tell me it was all right, that everyone had the dreams, that they would pass. But they did not pass. They grew worse. The enemy began using new tactics, sending their own armor against us. Crude vehicles cobbled together from civilian transports and mining equipment, but armed with weapons sufficient to threaten our tanks. The engagements became duels, my gun sight tracking their vehicles while they tried to line up shots on us, both of us knowing that the first hit would likely be the last. I learned to read the battlefield through the narrow view of the optic, to interpret the flicker of movement that meant an enemy gunner training on us, to fire before they did and move before their round arrived. I became very good at this. I say this without pride, merely as statement of fact. By the time we had fought through the second hive city and were preparing to assault the third, I had accumulated 43 confirmed vehicle kills, a number that would have earned me commendation if anyone in command had cared to track such things. But I did not feel accomplished. I felt nothing at all, only the numb continuation of action and reaction, target acquisition and fire mission, the mechanical process of identifying threats and eliminating them. It was during the assault on the third hive that Jens died. We were advancing through a processional avenue, a street lined with monuments to Imperial saints, when the mine detonated directly beneath the driver's compartment. The explosion tore through the hull, and Jens's screaming filled the internal vox for perhaps 5 seconds before it cut off. We could not reach him. The driver's station was sealed off from the rest of the tank, accessible only from outside, and so we continued forward, because stopping meant blocking the column and dying. Herrick's voice was steady, giving orders, and I followed them, because that was what I knew how to do. We fought for another 6 hours with Jens's corpse still in the driver's seat, the controls jammed, and the tank steering itself in slow circles until the fuel ran out. When the recovery crews finally reached us and opened the driver's hatch, the smell that emerged was beyond description, and I vomited on the street while the corpse handlers pulled what remained of Jens out of his station. They hosed down the compartment and installed a replacement driver, a man whose name I never learned and whose face I cannot recall, and we returned to the fight the next day. Something broke in me then, though I did not realize it at the time. The barrier between myself and the machine began to dissolve. I found myself thinking in terms of range and deflection, of armor, penetration, values, and ammunition types. When I looked at human beings, enemy and ally alike, I saw them as targets or non-targets, threats or non-threats, their status determined by their position relative to my firing arc. I stopped eating unless Pyotr forced food into my hands, stopped sleeping except when my body shut down from exhaustion. I sat at my station even when we were in the support area. I pressed to the gun sight, searching for enemies that were not there. Herrick noticed. He pulled me out of the tank one night and sat me down on an empty ammunition crate and told me to talk to him, to tell him what was wrong. But I could not explain it. How do you describe the feeling that you are disappearing, that the person you were is being overwritten by the function you perform? How do you articulate the horror of realizing that you have become a component, a part in a larger machine, valued only for your ability to identify targets and convert them into corpses? The fighting intensified as we pushed deeper into the hive cities. The heretics were making their final stand, throwing everything they had at us, and the casualties mounted. Our regiment, which had deployed with 96 tanks, was down to 37. Men I had known, crews I had trained with, all gone burned alive in their vehicles, or crushed beneath rubble, or simply listed as missing when their tanks failed to report in. The replacements were green, fresh from training worlds, their eyes wide with terror that they tried to hide behind bravado and prayer. They died quickly, their inexperience getting them killed in the first hour of their first engagement, and we stopped learning their names because there was no point. They were just placeholders, warm bodies to fill the stations until the next ambush or mine or artillery strike removed them and brought the next round of replacements. Pyotr died in the 7th month of the campaign. An armor-piercing shell penetrated the turret ring, and the fragments of metal torn from the interior by the impact turned the turret basket into an abattoir. He did not die immediately. He lay in the shell racks, his body broken and bleeding, and he tried to sing his hymns, but could only manage a wet gurgling that might have been words. I held his hand while I continued to fire the cannon, because we were in the middle of an engagement and could not stop, and I felt his grip weaken and then go still while I traversed to the next target. When the fighting ended, we wrapped what remained of him in a tarpaulin and strapped it to the rear deck, and that night I helped dig his grave in the poisoned soil of Kalista II, while the tech priests chanted the rites of remembrance. The new loader they assigned us was a boy of 17 who cried when he saw the blood still coating the turret interior, but he learned quickly, or he learned nothing at all, because war does not wait for grief. By the time we broke the back of the heretic resistance and the campaign entered its final phase, I was no longer entirely certain where I ended and the tank began. I moved through the stations like a ghost, performing my functions with mechanical precision while some distant part of my mind observed from far away. I could feel the crown of thorns around me, her armor my skin, her engine my heart, her weapons my hands. When she was hit, I felt the impact in my bones. When she killed, I felt the satisfaction of the mechanism functioning as designed. The other crew members, Herrick and the nameless loader and the driver, whose face I cannot recall, were just components like myself, each of us reduced to our function, valuable only insofar as we contributed to the machine's operation. I understood, finally, what the drill master had meant when he said we would become part of the tank. It was not metaphor, it was literal truth. The campaign ended with a whimper rather than a roar. The last of the heretics were cornered in the upper levels of the third hive and executed, their leaders hanged from the spires as a warning to any who might consider rebellion. The surviving tanks, 21 of the original 96, were assembled in the central plaza for inspection by the commanding officers, who walked among us and pronounced the campaign a success. We were given our medals in a ceremony that I remember only in fragments: the smell of incense, the sound of prayers, the weight of the medallion when they pinned it to my uniform. We were told we had served the Emperor faithfully, that our sacrifice had been noted and appreciated, that we could take pride in what we had accomplished. And then we were loaded back onto transport ships and carried away from Kalista II, leaving behind the graves of our comrades and the broken cities we had conquered, and the pieces of ourselves that we could never recover. The regiment was disbanded at the fortress world where I had trained. The survivors scattered to other units or retired to support roles if their injuries were severe enough. Harrick was promoted and given command of a new tank crew. The loaders and drivers were reassigned, and I was sent for evaluation because someone in the command structure had noticed the empty look in my eyes and the way I flinched at sudden movements and the fact that I had not spoken a voluntary word in 3 months. The medicae examined me in a cold room that smelled of disinfectant and declared me suffering from combat fatigue, a diagnosis that was both accurate and meaninglessly inadequate. They recommended rest and reassignment to non-combat duties, and I was transferred to a training facility where I was supposed to teach new gunners the skills that had kept me alive. But I could not do it. I stood before classes of young men and women who looked at me with respect and fear in equal measure, and I opened my mouth to speak and nothing came out. What could I tell them? That they would learn to be very good at killing, and that it would cost them everything that made them human. That the tank would become their world, and eventually their prison, and finally their tomb. That they would watch their friends die in fire and blood, and would keep fighting because there was no alternative, because stopping meant damnation. I stood silent while they waited, and eventually my commanding officer removed me from the teaching rotation and assigned me to maintenance duties, where I could be useful without needing to speak. I work in the motor pools now, servicing the tanks that younger men will take into battle. I perform the maintenance rituals with the same mechanical precision I brought to gunnery, my hands moving through the familiar motions of inspection and repair. I anoint the breech mechanisms and bless the ammunition feeds, and chant the litanies that keep the machine spirits content. And sometimes, when I am alone with a tank in the dim light of the maintenance bay, I climb inside and sit at the gunner's station, my eye to the gun sight, and I am back in the crown of thorns, feeling her weight around me, hearing her engines roar, seeing the targets cross my field of view. In those moments, I am complete again. In those moments, I am home. The dreams have never stopped. If anything, they have grown more vivid, more detailed. I am the gun sight, the targeting mechanism, the firing system. I am the round in flight, the explosive impact, the shrapnel that tears through flesh. I am the tank itself, my body the armor, my blood the fuel, my thoughts the calculations of trajectory and deflection. I wake in the darkness of my quarters, my hands clutching at my face, feeling for the metal that I know is there even though my fingers find only skin. I can feel myself disappearing, the last remnants of Mikhail Toran being overwritten by the function I performed, by the component I became. The tech priests have noticed. They watch me with interest, their augmetic eyes whirring as they zoom in on my face, their mechadendrites twitching with what might be curiosity or might be calculation. One of them approached me last month, his voice a synthesized rasp emerging from a Vox grill embedded in his throat, and asked me if I would consider augmentation. "You have demonstrated exceptional integration with machine systems," he said, his words emotionless and precise. "Your psychological profile suggests a rare compatibility with neural interfacing. You could serve the Omnissiah more completely. You could become one with the machines you maintain." I did not answer him. I did not need to. He could see the truth in my eyes that I am already one with the machines, that the transformation he offered had already taken place in all the ways that mattered. I think about death often, but not with fear or longing. It is simply another data point, another target to be acquired and engaged. I know that when it comes, whether from accident or age or the inevitable assignment to a combat zone, I will face it with the same mechanical precision I bring to every task. I will perform my function until I cannot, and then I will cease, and the machines will continue without me because the machines are eternal and we who serve them are temporary. This is the truth they do not tell you when they mark you for armored service, when they pin the medals to your chest and call you the Emperor's hammer. You do not drive the tank drives you. You do not serve the machine consumes you, piece by piece, until nothing remains but the function you perform. I write this in the hours before dawn, sitting in my quarters with a data slate I will erase before anyone can read it, because even acknowledging these thoughts is probably heresy, probably grounds for execution or mind wipe, or whatever punishment the commissariat deems appropriate for a soldier who has looked too clearly at what he has become. But I need to record it, if only for myself, if only to prove that some part of Mikhail Toran still exists, still remembers being human. Tomorrow, I will return to the motor pools and perform my duties and say nothing of what I have written here. I will service the tanks that will take other men to their transformation or their death, and I will do it well, because that is what I was made for. The engines are calling. Even here, even now, I can hear them not with my ears but with something deeper, some part of me that resonated at their frequency and never stopped vibrating. They call me back to the Crown of Thorns, wherever she is now, whatever crew inhabits her hull. They call me to climb inside and take my station and press my eye to the gun sight and become, once more, the component I was designed to be. And I know, with absolute certainty, that eventually I will answer. That eventually the last fragments of the person I was will dissolve entirely, and I will return to the machine, and we will become one, and it will be glorious and terrible and inevitable. This is the brutal reality of tank warfare in the Imperium. Not the medals or the commendations, not the victories or the glory. Just men in steel boxes, grinding each other into dust, while the machines we serve roll on forever, indifferent to our sacrifice, eternal in their purpose. We do not conquer in the Emperor's name. We are consumed by it. And in the end, that consumption is the only prayer that matters, the only truth that remains when all the litanies and hymns have faded into the roar of engines that never, ever stop. I can still hear them. I will always hear them, and one day soon I will stop fighting and let them take me completely. And I will be at peace in the only way left to me, lost forever in the thunder of the tanks that are the Imperium's fist, the Emperor's hammer, the grinding machinery that turns men into components and calls it duty. This is what we are. This is what we become. This is the price of service, paid in full, with no receipt and no refund. Only the endless, deafening roar of war. The maintenance bay is empty now. The other workers have gone to their rest, and I am alone with the tanks in the darkness, their hulls looming like sleeping giants. I walk among them, my hand trailing across their armor, feeling the cold metal beneath my palm. Each one is a tomb waiting to be filled, a prison waiting for its inmates, a machine waiting to consume the men who will crew it. And I bless them, because that is my function now. I bless them and prepare them, and send them out to do what I did, to transform other men the way I was transformed. The Crown of Thorns is still out there somewhere, still grinding across some battlefield I will never see, still consuming her crew in the Emperor's name. I hope they serve her well. I hope they learn to love her as I did, in that twisted, necessary way that is the only love possible between component and system. I hope they survive long enough to understand what they are becoming, and that understanding brings them whatever peace such knowledge can provide. But probably they will just die, as most crews do, burning in their steel coffin while the tanks around them push forward, because that is what tanks do. They advance, they fire, they kill, and when they die, they are replaced, and the advance continues, and nothing changes except the names on the casualty reports that no one reads. I am very tired. The data slate screen glows in the darkness, the words I have written reflecting in my eyes, and I know I should erase them now, should eliminate this evidence of dangerous thinking, but I cannot bring myself to do it, not yet. Let it remain for a few moments longer, this confession, this testimony, this prayer to a God I am not sure is listening. Let it exist as proof that Mikhail Toran was real, that he saw what was done to him, that he understood the price even as he paid it. The engines are calling, always calling, and I am answering, have been answering since the moment I first climbed into the crown of thorns and took my place at the gunner's station. The answer is written in the mechanical precision of my movements, in the empty efficiency of my service, in the dreams that tear me from sleep and the visions that haunt my waking hours. I am the gun sight and the firing mechanism and the round in flight. I am the tank and the tank is me, and together we are the Imperium's weapon, aimed and fired and forgotten. This is my confession. This is my testimony. This is the truth that no one wants to hear, but everyone who has served knows in their bones. We are not heroes. We are not warriors. We are components in a machine so vast and so terrible that it grinds entire worlds to dust and calls it victory. And we serve it gladly, desperately, because the alternative is to acknowledge what we have become, and that acknowledgement would destroy whatever fragments of sanity we have left. In the Emperor's name, we kill. In the machine god's name, we serve. In our own names, we cease to exist, becoming nothing but the function we perform, the station we occupy, the weapon we aim. And when we die, if we are lucky enough to die quickly, we leave nothing behind but serial numbers and equipment inventories and the tanks that will consume the next crew and the next, forever, until the stars burn out and the Imperium crumbles and the machines finally, mercifully, stop. But they will never stop. That is the final horror, the ultimate truth. The machines will never stop. And neither will we, because we are the machines now, and the machines are eternal, and our service has no end. I hear the engines. I will always hear the engines, and when they call loudly enough, when the last barrier between Mikhail Toran and the component he became finally dissolves, I will answer. I will climb into a tank, any tank, it does not matter which, and I will take my station, and I will become what I have always been becoming since the moment the tithe collectors marked me for armored service. I will become the weapon. I will become the machine. I will become the Emperor's wrath made manifest, and I will be complete.